Okay, welcome. And it works straight up. So I will talk over a little bit, but I'm going to introduce C. I am Martha Lane and I'm president of C this year. And we've been in existence for 35 years. Local, totally Bandon, really quite the outfit. I know, I recognize a lot of people here. Birding is pretty amazing all year round. And a day like today doesn't just get us. It's pretty special, and we are a 501c, so we are all member-based. We'll go for grants when we can. Nikki, our IT person and secretary, just got a nice grant from an organization called 100 Strong this year. Yeah, Nikki. So we get to grab a couple more. You get to get a couple more binoculars, some tripods. They can be lowered for anybody that needs it lowered, either children or wheelchairs. The RV site, just a lot of great things that give us that extra push that we value as nesting season is coming up. I'm kind of curious as to how many of you are members of C? Would you wave a hand? What about thank you for being here, and then members and volunteers? Probably just about, yeah. And then how about locals? All people that live here, no? As where most of us are. And then visitors to the area. Any visitors, welcome. We're glad you all could come today. There are cookies and muffins and coffee. We apologize if you hear us, but it is, and tea. So help yourself. Thank you to the Bandon Public Library. The space is amazing. Their helpfulness in setting us up and encouraging all kinds of things to go on here. I know later today, I think it starts at 11, there's an annual members mimosa party at the Historical Museum. If any of you were about that, you're in your mind, that's good fun. We do have a membership table and our new board member, Susan Harrow, or Susan, would you give us a wave? If you would like to join today, she's the lady to take care of you up at that table in the front.
And if you can get one of our brochures right here, it's got a membership sign in on that.
Okay.
I have them there.
Great. And then our volunteers that you will be seeing on the block are all coordinated and set up, and that whole next several months schedule is set up by Lori Friedman. Lori, can you give us a wave? You may know her online. And I could go on and basically introduce everyone and what they do, which I think this would be a good meeting to do that in. Robin McCreary, if you know about this, it's probably because of Robin. Robin, raise your hand. And Dave Bone is our interpreter extraordinaire. He's also on our board. Unfortunately, he's not here. They live a little further away. Jackie Maldonado is our graphics person. She also does the walk in the wild. We say walk on the wild.
For the wild.
For the wild. For the wild, in the wild. And then Karen Paulson, board member at large. And let me show, and I've introduced Nikki, our treasurer, who keeps really us solvent and insured and has to do such uncomfortable. Betsy, there she is, and also makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. And our vice president, who should be up here doing this instead of me, Nancy Messner, right there. Yeah, and also involved with our Rocky Habitat connection. So people have multi-hats, but it's a working board, is my point. And we'd love to have you be a member. We'd welcome you in our volunteer training coming up in May. There is an activities sheet that Berta will show you at the end. And with no further ado, I'll introduce Berta Dargan as our board member. She will introduce.
Okay. Good morning. We are so fortunate today to have Alex Cook sharing her expertise. We kind of don't know how long we're gonna have her. But we hope forever. She's been here for a while, yeah, in this area, so, but Alex is the refuge manager, for US Fish and Wildlife. And she's been an avian biologist all over the country and worked for, US Fish and Wildlife Services since 2022. So we hope she's gonna be safe. Yeah. How important the Fish and Wildlife and the other agencies are, so. Alex has a master's degree, in wildlife conservation from the State University of New York, the College of Environmental Science and Forestry, where she studied the salt marsh sparrow, a small tidal marsh sparrow endemic. She's worked with a variety of bird species, including nesting plovers and terns, salt marsh nesting birds, overwintering warblers in the Caribbean. I'd be willing to do that. And are breeding shorebirds in Alaska. No. No summer, okay. Long day. But she's on the Oregon coast now, and we're very, very glad to have Alex here. So, Alex, take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you everyone for being here. And thank you, Steve, for hosting these. Nice to have these gathering places and, times to see each other and share our knowledge. So today I'm going to talk about birds of the Oregon coast. If it's going to work. It worked a second ago. There we go. So Bert already gave me a nice introduction. For those of you who don't know me, I am the refuge manager here at Bandon Marsh National Wildlife Refuge, as well as southern portions of Oregon Islands National Wildlife Refuge, which is Coquille Point and all those offshore islands. I'm originally from the East Coast. I grew up on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, so I've always been a coastal person, and always loved kind of living in these small coastal communities that have such beautiful wildlife just in our backyards. And today I'm going to talk about seabirds, marsh birds, and shorebirds. And, I did throw some other birds in there that don't quite fit into the category, but it's evolving every year. So first I'm going to talk about seabirds, which obviously we see most often here out at Coquille Point and in Bandon. So we'll go through some of the different species that you might see when you're out here in the summertime. They're just starting to show their faces again. So we'll see some of those birds today, but not all of them. A lot of the birds fall into this category of alcids. So alcids are kind of like the northern hemisphere version of a penguin. So we don't have penguins in the northern hemisphere, but alcids are very similar in their body shapes and functional forms. The way they have short wings, feet for swimming, things like that. Although these birds can fly. So a lot of them are pelagic species, which means they spend all of their life out at the ocean, except they come to these islands to breed. So they're never on the mainland. They're never going to be up in a tree or in a bush or anything. When they're not here on our rocks in Bandon, they're out in the ocean. They're diving for fish. They're sleeping on the water. They've actually evolved special parts in their noses that allow them to filter the salt out of water so that they can drink salt water. So pretty cool evolutionary species group of birds. And a lot of them are monomorphic and monogamous, which means the males and females look the same, so you can't tell a male versus female with these birds. And they're monogamous, so they mate, in a pair all through the summertime. And they're colonial nesters, so they like to nest in big groups like we see out in the rocks in Bandon. So one of the most common ones we see, and the one that is starting to come back, though not ready to nest yet, just kind of scoping things out, is the common murre. So there are about 500,000 common murres here in Oregon. Oregon Islands National Wildlife, actually every offshore rock reef and island on the whole coast of Oregon. So from the northern boundary to California, all of the offshore rocks are wildlife refuge, and they're all designated wilderness. And that's for the protection of these colonial seabirds. So we have about, I think it's like 1.2 million seabirds nest on all of Oregon's rocks. So we're pretty lucky to have such high densities out here. The common murres are some of the, the biggest numbers of that 1.2 million. They live a long time for a bird, about 25 years, and they do come back to the same site. So they have high fidelity at their breeding sites. So the birds that come to Elephant Rock have likely been coming to that rock for many years. They, like we said, are monogamous, so they mate, and they have a pretty equal ratio. So for every male, there's a female. And I don't know how they pick their mate. That was a question someone asked me once in the past. I mean, I should look it up, but we probably don't know that. A lot of that behavior stuff's really hard to get down to the facts of. But we see them here in Bandon, and they like to nest on the tops of rocky islands. So we'll talk about other birds that like to burrow or like to be on the cliffs, but these guys like to be on the kind of flat top surface. And part of that is because of their quote unquote nest, which isn't really a nest. It's just they plop an egg down on the rock. And that's something that's interesting about their egg shape is that it's been thought that it's so long and like, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but it's so long so that it won't roll off, it will roll in a circle. So it won't fall off a cliff, it just might spin around. And they only lay one egg. So that's why it's really important that, you know, if there's drones or predators are about, if they lose that one egg, that was their one chick and that was their one shot. And they incubate for about 32 days, which is pretty long. So it's a month of that bird having to incubate the egg before it hatches into a chick. They are really good divers. So all these seabirds, you know, they eat fish and they have those kind of short stubby wings that are not that great for flying, but are really good for swimming in the water. And I guess someone recorded that a mer has dived up to 300 feet to catch fish. And they bring those fish back, they feed them to their one chick. And then once the chick gets old enough to be able to fly and be out on the open ocean, the females get to go and say, I did my part, you can take care of it, Dad. And the males and the young will spend about 1 to 2 months together out at sea. So if you're ever out on a boat fishing and you see kind of the adult mer and then a slightly smaller one, and they're swimming together, that's going to be probably a male and it's young. And I think it's really cute to see them together. Another cool bird that we have here are called pigeon guillemots. And they also are, you know, on our rocky islands. They're not such huge colonies as the mers, which have thousands of birds, but they like to be in small groups. They're crevice nesters, so they're not necessarily on the top of an island, but they might be on the slope of a little edge. My favorite spot to see them is in the trunk of Elephant Rock. You'll see them kind of flying through there and around. And they have these really bright red-orange feet. So if you see a bird and you just see that flash of black and white and orange on the feet, probably a pigeon guillemot. And they lay about 1 to 2 eggs. So that's an example of kind of their crevice. So it's not quite as deep as a true burrow of other burrow nesting species, but they're also not on the tops of rocks. And a lot of these seabird chicks are just like adorable fluff balls. They gotta stay warm, they stay insulated from that cold, you know, even though it's summertime, we know it's not that warm here. So keeps them nice and warm. And again, they get fed fish by their parents. And this was cool. It said this chick can double its weight in 5 days and triple its weight in 10 days. So these chicks, that adults are just going back and forth bringing fish. And so that's why during the summertime, you'll see these seabirds are very busy. They're just always coming and going and they got places to be. And that's because they're feeding their hungry chicks. But unlike the common mer, where the male bird will kind of shepherd the chick through its first couple months of life, teach it how to fish. The pigeon guillemot chick is completely independent once it leaves its nest. So, you know, it looks, the parents get it nice and full, nice and fat. It's got some reserves, and then it's off into the ocean to learn how to fish and be a bird all by itself. So there's different strategies that these birds have that have evolved. And it's just interesting to see the different strategies. Also, if anyone has any questions, feel free to just interrupt me or save them to the end, whatever is easier. Here in Bandon, we love our tufted puffins. So these guys are burrow nesters, which we'll show some pictures of. And tufted puffins are a West Coast Pacific species of puffins. So you'll see they're from Alaska to California. The Atlantic coast has the Atlantic puffin, which is very similar, but doesn't have these cool tufts. So we get the tufted puffin. And there are pretty high numbers in Alaska and in the northern parts of their range. But here in Oregon and California, we've been seeing a decline in the species and are kind of at that southern extent, so the numbers aren't quite as dense. So they're burrow nesters. They will literally dig holes in the soil to make their burrows and line it with vegetation and kind of make it cozy in there. The average burrow depth is 33 inches, so that's over 2 feet. We've actually done some work on the islands and I have been able to stick my hand in a puffin burrow and I didn't even reach the end. Like, try to go all the way in and I couldn't even get all the way in. So it's pretty impressive how deep they can dig these burrows, and the chicks and the egg stay in there and they're pretty safe from predators and from weather and things like that in that burrow. Puffins, like Marsh, they only lay 1 egg. So they got that 1 egg, 1 shot to have a successful chick that year. They are ultimate fishermen, so they rely on a variety of different fish species, and they have these kind of interesting evolved beaks that let them carry multiple fish back from their foraging trips. So the average beakful someone found was about 10 fish, and a record was 60. So people have done studies where they kind of just park themselves on the beach and they watch the puffins come and go, and they take photographs and they try to identify the species of fish that the birds are eating and then count how many they are. And that's kind of the only way we can start to look at what species of fish they're relying on for food and how frequently do they need to make those foraging trips. And part of why they're able to carry so many fish is because they have these things called denticles in the top of their mouth. It kind of looks like, Velcro almost. And so it keeps the fish up in their mouth so that they can keep them as the fish in the back of their mouth with the denticles and then catch a new fish with the front of their bill, and then hold on to them and fly back to their ship with them. So here in Bandon, we are lucky that we can actually see puffins out at Face Rock. And if you haven't gone to Face Rock in the summertime, C will be there with their spotting scopes. I can't promise that Jackie will be in the puffin costume when you're there. But if you're lucky, Jackie will be in the puffin costume. And it's a really cool opportunity to see these puffins. So it's a little grainy, but through a scope, you can see the birds going in and out of their burrows. Carol, how many were last year? 10? Well, 10 pairs or 10?
10 birds.
10 birds. So at least 5 nests of puffins out at Face Rock last year. So I had never seen a tufted puffin until I moved out here. So we're pretty lucky. There's a lot of the colonies of these burrow nesting seabirds are too far offshore that you can't actually get to see them. So it's really only Haystack Rock up in Cannon Beach and then Face Rock here in Bandon are one of the few places on the whole coast that you can actually see a puffin. So go to Face Rock in the summertime, see a puffin.
Do they come back to the same burrow, do we know?
I think likely yes, but I'm not sure if anyone has actually looked at that, like here in Oregon. I bet the people who work in Maine, who work at the Atlantic puffins, have looked at that. I think they definitely come back to the same rock, but I would guess yes, but I don't have the true answer for you.
Is there a particular month that has been identified as more likely to see them?
Yeah, so they start coming back in May. So see, we'll have a puffin party on the first Saturday of May. May 3rd. May 3rd is the puffin welcome back puffin party here in Bandon. And so then May, June, July, kind of June and July is when their core breeding season is, and they'll be the most active coming in and out. And puffins are active in the daytime, so that's another reason why they're easier to see than some of these other seabirds. Yeah.
Lifespan?
What was that?
Lifespan?
Oh, if I don't have it on the slide, I probably don't know it off the top of my head.
Oh,
I would bet at least 10, 15 years. They're kind of a larger body bird. I bet they live a while, yeah. Good. Thanks. So another bird that's similar to the puffin is a rhinoceros auklet. They are closely related in that, they have similar shapes of their bills. They are also burrow nesters, but they are nocturnal. So like I said, we're lucky that we can see puffins because they're active in the daytime and Face Rock is close to shore, whereas rhinoceros auklets are active at night. The hypothesis for a lot of why some of these seabirds might be active at night is because it avoids interactions with gulls. So gulls are native here, of course, but Gulls will eat anything, and so if you kind of time your activity to be opposite of when the gulls are active, they might not key into where your nest is, and might not. Gulls will try to steal fish from other birds. I mean, they will do what they can do. They're resourceful animals. So the rhino offsets like to stay active at night, and you'll see they have a pretty wide range. So they nest on our coast, and then they're also found in Asia and Japan. Something I thought was interesting was that no one really knows why they have this formation on their nose. And of course, that is their namesake, being a rhino auklet, but we don't really know why it's there. And it appears to be the same size in both males and females. So, you know, a lot of times the males might have something different about them to attract a female, but like we said at the beginning, most alcids, the males and females look the same. And that's the case with these guys too. So just interesting how much we still don't know about so many species out there. We do have rhinoceros auklets here on the south coast. So this is out at Hunter's Island, which is kind of near Myers Creek, you know, south of north or south of Gold Beach, near Gold Beach. And south, okay. I'm like 101. So we were out there in 2023 mapping rhinoceros auklet burrows for potential projects that might happen in the future. And so there we are, like we said, sticking our hands in the burrows all the way in, trying to feel if there was anything in them, if there was kind of fresh soil, did it look like a bird was using that burrow this year? And we collected 249 burrow locations. Some of them we believe were also tufted puffin burrows. They were a little bit larger, but we were out there in either late September or October. So a lot of the birds had kind of moved on. And that was by design. We didn't want to be disturbing the birds during their breeding season, but we did want to get this information and at least get baseline of how many birds were out there in past years. So hopefully we will be getting some funding to maybe do some more work out there in future years. Then another bird, which it's not really a seabird, it's more of a shorebird, but it kind of falls into this category of seabirds better, is the black oyster catcher, which we have here on the Pacific coast. There's a East Coast counterpart called the American oyster catcher that looks very similar. And they're found in these rocky shorelines from Alaska all the way down to Mexico. And there's not that many of them in the world. So the world population is about 10,000, and we're lucky in Oregon here to have around 500. They're considered a species of concern because of that restricted range and small population size. They're kind of unique, and they require specific habitat, and they're very susceptible to disturbance. And so that can impact their nesting success, which then can impact, you know, their long-term population viability. And there's a lot of work done by Bird Alliance of Oregon, which was formerly Portland Audubon, to kind of track those populations and see what we have here in Oregon. So what I first just wanted to mention is, why are they called oyster catchers? I think it's one of the better bird names out there. And that's because they literally can use their bill to pry mussels, oysters, limpets, things like that off the rocks. So it's kind of like having an oyster shucking knife or a bill. So they're pretty cool to watch, you know, feed along the rocks and pry things open and either eat it or feed their chick that piece of food. So here in Bandon, we are very lucky to have a lot of oyster catchers, thanks to volunteers like Diane and Terry's not here. Well, thanks to lots of wonderful volunteers here in Bandon. They have been monitoring the black oyster catcher nests along the shore for many years, and contributing that data to the coastwide data set with Bird Alliance of Oregon. So when you're out on the beaches, you might find a volunteer or bring your binoculars, and you have to look pretty closely because they do really blend in with the rocks. But that's an incubating oyster, so oyster catcher. So that one's sitting on a nest. And then when their eggs hatch, they lay generally 3 eggs, but it can be 2 to 3. They'll get some chicks, and then their chicks will be up and running around within a few hours. Unlike those seabirds that kind of just sit and stay in their burrow, these guys get up and running, and they follow their parents around, and it's really cute to watch them kind of run on the rocks. And, you know, if they're on an island, then those chicks are going to be on that island until they can fly. And so Diane provided me with this wonderful map that showed us how many oyster catcher nests we had and where they were last year. And so you can see here in Bandon, so this is Coquille Point, This is Devil's Kitchen area, and then this is, from the Face Rockaway side. So depending where you are on the beach in Bandon, in the summertime, you're not far from an oyster catcher nest. And I should get an audio in here. They make that really kind of loud, yelling, screaming call. I'm sure you've all heard it. You can hear it right now too. So they're here year round. But they're nesting in the, May, June, July time. So yeah, so lots of nests in Bandon, lots of awesome volunteers helping us monitor them. And I wanted to point out the differences between a fledgling and an adult. So if we get to the end of the summer and we do have success with some of our nests, we'll hopefully have fledglings out and about. And they are similar in size to adults. They get that almost same body size, but the biggest difference is that their bill is not fully orange yet. So if you see on that adult, it's got that really bright bill, but the fledgling is kind of half black, half orange. The fledglings don't have that strong eye ring yet. And then another fine detail, if you've got a nice scope or binoculars, is you can kind of see the scalloping on those fresh feathers that the fledgling has. So those are brand new feathers. They're crisp, they're clean, they've got the scalloping. And adults are gonna not have that, look a little more worn. So hopefully we'll have lots of fledglings around Bandon this summer. Another group I was gonna talk about are cormorants. So we have about 3 species of cormorants here in the Oregon coast. They have much longer, thinner bills than seabirds. Yeah, they're pretty funny. They have webbed feet, so they use their feet to dive and swim, whereas a murre is going to use its wings. So these guys, their wings are actually, they don't have the same oil glands that a lot of birds do, so their wings are not as waterproof. So that's an interesting difference between them. And they also like to nest in colonies, not quite as big as the common murres, but along the cliffs, and sometimes you'll see them, on old bridges or old docks, things like that. So the pelagic cormorant is one of the common species we have here. They're the easiest to identify because of that bright white butt. They have these 2 white butt patches on them that you can see when they are flying. So if you're not sure what cormorant species it is and you see those 2 white dots, you saw a pelagic cormorant. They will grab fish with their bill and not instead of spearing it. And they also have a pretty long lifespan, about 18 years. A lot of these large-bodied seabirds do. Brandt's cormorants, which I hear Mickey is really good at impersonating, are another species we have here. So the Brandt's cormorants in their breeding plumage will get this blue color on the bottom of their neck, I guess. And so Brandt's blue, that's how I remember, which is which. The pelagic's got the white dots, Brandt's blue, have the blue tone to them. And they also, are kind of sociable, like to nest in colonies. And one of their fun facts was that they have a very large blood volume compared to their body weight. And the hypothesis for that was because they're diving deep. I would think a lot of seabirds have that. They need to have a lot of oxygen in their blood so that they can dive deep underwater, catch the fish, and then return back to the shore. Oh, that one's out of order. Back to the pelagic cormorant. It nests on narrow ledges, and so they will kind of take sticks and debris, and they will use their own guano to act as cement to get that to stay onto those cliff sides. And they'll come back, reuse some of the same spots every year. And so these guys you might see on the rocks here in Bandon, kind of like midway up on the rocks, there'll be like little terraces of cormorant nests. And they can lay up to 8 eggs, but it's usually about 4. And same thing, when they come back, they feed their chicks, and the chicks kind of just are waiting there for the adult to feed them. And now we have our friend peregrine falcon, who's not quite a seabird, but I lumped him into this category. When I was getting pictures and doing some research for this presentation, I came across this line that said, in the Pacific Northwest, enormous numbers of marine bird species support one of the densest known peregrine populations. So I knew we had peregrines, but I didn't know that we were known for having some of the densest populations. And that makes sense because we have a lot of seabirds and we have a lot of cliffs. So peregrines are reliant on nesting on rocky ledges, cliffs. So, maybe if you're in Wyoming, they might be on a plateau, above a sagebrush area. Here, they're out on our rocky coast. And then they've also adapted in these urban areas to nest on skyscrapers. So they'll be on the roofs of buildings. Some buildings are even starting to put out kind of little platforms for them. And they are the fastest animal in the world when they're diving. So if they're just flying straight, I don't know if they beat anything, but when they're zooming down to catch an animal, they can go up to 200 miles per hour. Yeah, and they will chase and catch their prey mid-air. So they're kind of flying and trying to grab the other birds out of the air. They mostly eat other birds. So that's an interesting thing. Where I went to school in Massachusetts, we had a peregrine that nested on our library. They were a really tall, kind of, 30-story library. And it was always eating the ducks in the pond. That was in the middle of our campus. And you'd walk around and you'd see these duck heads everywhere. They don't eat the heads for whatever reason. And that was just part of having a peregrine on. I thought it was cool. I don't know. Their chicks take about 40 days to fledge. So that's pretty long time for a chick to be waiting to fly. And they can be migratory, but they have pretty high site fidelity. So they do often come back to the same cliffs and edges. We do have some here in Bandon out on the Face Rock overlook out on there. You can see a peregrine sometimes nesting if you're lucky. They are susceptible to bird flu. And so this past year, I've heard people reporting that peregrines were not coming back to the sites that they had seen them in the past. And one hypothesis was that it's this highly contagious bird flu is impacting them right now. So in general, some threats to seabirds are obviously fireworks, drones, lights from hotels and things like that. Predators can be a big problem. So crows and ravens will also eat anything they can get. Bald eagles and mink as well. So what's really dangerous to seabirds is, if the drone is flying over a rock, disturbing all the seabirds, the oyster catchers get up to chase the drone, and then the raven comes and eats the eggs while the oyster catcher is distracted by the drone. So that's why we really want to minimize impacts to these seabirds during their nesting periods, because like we said, this might be their one shot to raise a chick that year. And if someone with a drone disturbs it and that egg gets eaten, it's a real loss for them. And then one of the bigger issues that's harder to kind of wrap our head around is food resources. So all these birds rely on fish, and climate change is impacting ocean temperatures and ocean acidification, which is having wider impacts on these forage fish. So that's something important to look into. Okay, on to tidal marsh birds. So here in Bandon at the refuge that I manage, many of you probably know, because you may have already lived here during this, there was a big restoration project that happened at Moleston. This was a marshland that was converted for agriculture that then the refuge converted back into natural tidal marsh. So it's looking happy. It's got a lot of salt marsh plants back. The salt water is flowing in and out like it should now. And it was a great success story for sure. So tidal marsh systems are really dynamic. They have a lot of food in them and a lot of energy in them, but they also get flooded with salt water twice a day. So it's a great place to live because you want to eat all the bugs and get all the energy, but you have to deal with flooding coming in twice a day, salty flooding. And then they're also pretty homogeneous. So if you think about a forest, a bird has a lot of places to hide. It's got shrubs, it's got bushes, trees, whereas the salt marsh is kind of all flat. And so if you want to live in a salt marsh, you have to be good at kind of concealing your activity so predators don't notice you. So one of the species we see all the time at the salt marshes are the marsh wren. They're kind of always flitting about and singing. They're kind of, social animals. They're always out and about. And they interestingly are polygynous. So they, one male will mate with multiple females, and the males will build these kind of hanging nests out of marsh grasses. And then the females pick which one they want. And they're just kind of using the vegetation that is around them to build these nests. They lay about 4 to 6 eggs, and their incubation time is only 13 days. So that peregrine was 40 days of incubation, and now I forget what the MERS were, but 32 or something like that. So a long time. So these guys have to grow really fast and really quick. And that's because of the tides. So the tide cycle is about 28 days from, full moon to new moon. And if you're living in a tidal marsh, you kind of want to lay your eggs and raise your chicks in between those two highest tides, and you have about 28 days to do that. So a marsh wren incubates their eggs for 13 days, and then in another 13 days, the chicks can leave the nest. That's what, 26 days? Pretty close to that 28-day tide cycle. So that's why a lot of salt marsh birds have evolved to grow really fast, feed their chicks a lot of food, and kind of get out and about before that high water comes in. So they're still going to be in the marsh, but the chicks will be old enough to climb out of the nest and up high to avoid those high tides. So yeah, nature's just really cool. Something about marsh wrens that I wish I totally understood, but they will peck and destroy the eggs of their own species and others. So they will go around and you know, another bird tries to nest near them, they'll peck their eggs. Some sort of weird social behavior, but it's translated into marsh wrens having eggs that are 2.9 times stronger than similar sized passerine bird eggs. So they have built up their own defenses so that their eggs can't get pecked by other marsh wrens, but those other guys are going to be vulnerable. So again, just an interesting evolutionary story. The species we see a lot here is the great blue heron. They are not a shorebird, not a seabird. They're considered a wading bird. So a lot of these tall egrets and herons fall into this. They primarily eat fish, but you'll see they're distributed all across the continent. So because I always live in coastal areas, I think of them as a coastal bird, but they're actually all through the country. You know, you'll see them along rivers, wet fields, pastures, things like that. So they'll eat fish, but they'll eat grasshoppers, kind of whatever they can get their bill on. And they use that really long neck to strike at their prey and then gobble them down. They nest in trees. So they build these kind of stick nests at the tops of trees, and they like to nest in colonies that are called rookeries. And they're kind of funny. I feel like it kind of looks Dr. Seussy in these like awkward birds up in these stick nests. And they'll come back to the same those nests, and sometimes the nests get bigger and bigger, and similarly their guano will kind of dry and solidify and cement those sticks together, and some of the nests can get really big. They lay about 2 to 4 eggs, and these chicks are very high maintenance. They take 49 to 81 days to be ready to fly, so these parents are taking care of them, and the chicks are also just kind of ridiculous looking, mohawked, funny guys, and they'll fight and they'll, you know, walk at each other, and it's a very smelly place to be, but it's kind of cool to think of. Similar species that we have around here is the great egret. So just to kind of help people tell the difference between the two, great blue herons have that, you know, plume to their head, whereas an egret doesn't. Great blue herons have kind of paler leg color. It's not like a true jet black, where a great egret is going to have black legs. And then, of course, the herons have that stripe that's connected to the plume. And so you might see both of these species when you're here on the coast. The marsh has a lot of raptors in it, especially in the wintertime. And part of that's because there's a lot of small like voles and mice that also like to live in the marsh. So it's good hunting over the marshes. So here in Bandon, we have the white-tailed kite that comes in the summertime. It's one of my favorite parts, sitting at my desk and I'm overlooking the marsh, and I can see the white-tailed kites hunting over the marsh. And they have kind of an interesting distribution. I had never seen one before until I moved to Bandon, so it was pretty exciting. You can see kind of that Western Oregon, we have them, so we're lucky to have them here. And kites are a type of raptor that are known for this kiting behavior, where they hover and they flap their wings in one place above looking for their prey, and then they will all of a sudden swoop on down with their legs out to catch their prey. And they're not super territorial, especially in the winter time. So sometimes I've seen 3 or 4 kind of flying around and hunting the marsh in Bandon, and then they will actually nest in treetops, which I don't have a picture of, and I have never seen a nest, but it'd be really cool to see. I think California has some pretty high densities of nesting. Another species that's here commonly hunting in the marshes alongside the white-tailed kites is the northern harrier. I grew up calling them marsh hawks because that's what they are. You see them in the marsh. And they have this really kind of nice V pattern and that whether they hold their wings and they fly and they soar above the marshes looking for prey. And they're also found throughout the country. So again, I'm used to seeing them in marshes, but people will see them in fields, pastures. The Midwest has them all over. So another cool species that we have, and they, unlike the seabirds, where you can't tell males and females apart, you can with northern harriers. So the females are brown and larger, and then the males are gray and smaller, and then the juveniles will be brown until they grow up and, you know, will either be the brown or gray morph. And the surest way to identify a northern harrier is with that white rump. So if you see a raptor kind of flying low, and you see that flash of white, it's probably a northern harrier. And then another really cool thing about them that you can kind of see in this top photo is they have facial discs like an owl. So if you can picture an owl that has that kind of heart shape on either side of them, and that's to funnel sound into their ears. So it aids in their hearing. So they're kind of hunting like owls are, where they're listening for the prey below, and then when they hear it, they'll dive in and grab them. Harriers? No, like a hawk, big hawk. Not as big as an eagle, kind of like a red-tailed hawk size, but a little more like elegant. And they are ground nesters, which I thought was interesting. I've never seen a nest, but they'll kind of, this looks like they're kind of hidden in some, you know, tall reeds and the edges of a marsh. And their nests can be really kind of flat and wide. And they'll lay 4 to 5 eggs and raise their chicks, bringing them rodents and prey that they would catch to feed them. And so all of these raptors, anything that's catching small mammals, anything like pesticides or rat poisoning can be really detrimental to those species, because you poison the rats and then they're eating them and passing them on to their young. That can have impacts on their lifespan for sure. Then we have the Virginia rail, which is associated with fresh or brackish water wetlands. We do have them in Moleston Marsh. We found one on our Christmas bird count day. It's very exciting because they can be considered secretive marsh birds. So a lot of these rails, they kind of stay low and they run through the grasses, and they don't fly very frequently unless they really have to. And they can be very territorial. So that's why they'll kind of come out and see what you're up to if you're in their territory. And they weave nests just like the marsh wren, but these nests are kind of flat, and they kind of build a platform up. So if this is some marsh grasses, they'll kind of weave a nest into the marsh grasses. And then they'll even build little canopies to come over and cover them so that a predator from above might not see them sitting there. They'll just see the grasses. And they can lay up to 13 eggs. So they have a really big clutch compared to some of these other species we talked about. And part of why they can have so many chicks is because their chicks are precocial, is the word. And that means once they hatch, they can get up and walk around, and they can even feed themselves. So the adults don't need to feed the chicks like the seabirds who are going fishing, bring the fish back. These guys, they just follow mom around and they learn to peck at the invertebrates, and they can feed themselves. So that's part of why they can have so many chicks, is because they're not bringing food back for them. And both the males and females do tend for the chicks, so they'll kind of all move together as a family group. And something I learned in the research was that they have one of the strongest legs, so the highest leg muscle to flight muscle ratio. So remember I said they don't fly very often unless they have to. These guys are just running. They're running all over the marsh, and that's kind of their strategies. Remember I said there's no bushes for them to hide in, so they're going to stay low in the grass. Some threats to marsh birds are obviously sea level rise. So if our salt marshes can't keep up pace with elevation with sea level rise, they're gonna lose habitat and increase that tidal flooding. So if the marshes, you know, used to only get so many feet of water, but it was enough for that marsh wren to raise its eggs in that 28 days. But if it starts coming more and more, then that window for them to find success is gonna get shorter and shorter and harder for them to succeed. Invasive species can impact marshes. So you know, I talk about how much vegetation was used in their nesting materials, and so if they don't have the vegetation they like, they might not be able to build as sturdy of a nest as they normally do. And then, of course, just human development, so conversion of salt marshes into housing or agriculture, things like that, is just straight up loss of habitat. Okay, the last group we're going to talk about is shorebirds. So here in Bandon, most of the shorebirds that we see, other than the snowy plover, are just passing through. They're just migratory. So most of the shorebirds that I'm going to talk about, they'll nest up in the Arctic, and then they'll winter down in Mexico or South America, and we're just kind of a stopping point along the way. So what we have here in Bandon are western sandpipers a lot during the fall and spring migration times, and they are a small shorebird. They're called a peep, is one of the categories of sandpipers that they are. And they get this nice rusty plumage in their breeding season. And so when you see them passing through Bandon, they might just be starting to lose that. So you might see some that are rustier or some that might be more white because they've started to lose that breeding plumage. And like I said, they breed in the Arctic and then winter down in the southern hemisphere. And they're a tiny little bird, but they migrate over 6,000 miles every year to go from wintering to breeding back and forth. And they only weigh about the weight of a AA battery. There are a lot of them right now in the world. So there's about 3.5 million individuals. And like I said, we have some really large flocks in Oregon. In the early 2000s, some surveys were being done and they recorded 70,000 western sandpipers using the Bandon Marsh mud flat. And I went out the last couple of years to do some surveys and we had about 25,000. So still some good numbers. That 70,000 is going to be hard to beat, but it's nice to know we still have some big flocks coming through. Another similar species that you'll see mixed in with the western sandpipers is something called a least sandpiper. And the least sandpiper it's definitely smaller, but you know, when they're all out there and they're hard to see, it's not always easy to tell the difference. But one of the big differences between westerns and least is their leg color. So western sandpipers have black legs and least sandpipers kind of have a yellowish green leg. And so if you have a strong enough spotting scope and you can see that leg color, then that's a good way to try to tell the difference between them. Another fun bird that we get to see a lot here in Bandon is the whimbrel. So whimbrel, large shorebird. I've tried to find a picture of like the sandpipers and the whimbrels together, but I couldn't find one online. But a whimbrel is much taller compared to a little sandpiper. And they have this really distinct V-curved bill that helps them probe for invertebrates in the mudflats. And then they have this kind of stripe through their head. And you can see their range is kind of restricted. They're on the East Coast as well, but they're really tied to these coastal areas. So learned all that much, except for that one part of Canada. And they are also long distance migrants, as most of these shorebirds are. Someone recorded a nonstop flight of a whimbrel going 2,500 miles, which is just crazy. Birds are just crazy. So here in Bandon, it's pretty common to see flocks like this out on the beach. Interestingly, you'll see the whimbrels like in the mudflats in Bandon Marsh, but you'll also see them out in the sandy beaches. Sometimes you'll see a nice flock flying by, so look for that. I feel like I see them more in the fall than I do in the spring, but they should be passing through both directions. So shorebird tracking is something I was excited to add in this presentation this year. We here in Bandon have one of these towers on the bridge at Bullard's Beach, and then we have a second tower down in Langlois. And these are something called Motus towers. There's a network of them across the country and in other countries. So all of those yellow dots represent a Motus tower. They don't all necessarily look exactly like this, but they're essentially antennas and a solar panel and a battery. And the antennas are receivers to these tags that the shorebirds and other birds get fitted with for research projects. So this is a little sandpiper with a nano tag on it. And that nano tag has its own number. And so when that bird flies within a certain distance of these antennas, up to 10 kilometers, they can record. It records that bird's number, the time, the date, and the theory, and it works, is if the bird starts up here and it's flying all the way to Mexico, multiple of these towers along the way will record it. And so we can see how long it's taking birds to fly, how long they're staying in one spot, so how long are they staying in Bandon to feed before they leave. And then even some birds, there was a Swainson's thrush that was recorded in Bandon, that flew to North Carolina. And you just would never know these things if you didn't have these tags on here. And technology is just getting better and better. So, you know, you have to, consider the weight of the tag onto the weight of the bird. And so, you know, you can't put them on hummingbirds yet, but things like shorebirds and, robins and things like that, they can handle these tags and they eventually usually fall off. And so just a temporary tag on the bird and it gives us a lot of information and insight. And so this is actually, there's a website, a MODIS website, that you can click on any of the towers and look at the records that they've recorded. So this is from the tower, from the antennas on top of Bullard's Bridge here. So you can see that top one is from November of last year, and it was a Dunlin, and I clicked on that tag deployment, to see where, it came from, and it came from Vancouver Island, Washington. So that's where it was tagged originally. It looks like they deployed the tag in 2022, and so we still got the tag on in 2024. And these are all specific research projects that enter their information into the MODIS website. And, yeah, it's a really cool, kind of, you know, nationwide project. The Refuge, we're working with, the Migratory Bird Division of the Fish and Wildlife Services, who have funding to put these projects up. And ODOT has been really helpful and, accommodating us with that tower on the bridge. So, next time you drive over the bridge, just know there's a bird tracking tower up there. Some threats to shorebirds. Unfortunately, our climate change, like we said with the seabirds, especially up in the Arctic, so many of these birds are breeding up there, and the Arctic is experiencing higher rates of climate change than we're seeing, you know, down by the equator. So they're getting impacted stronger and harder at those poles. And timing is really important with shorebirds. You know, they just flew 3,000 miles and they get there and they need food. And so if the insect hatching, so shorebirds rely a lot on insects, and up in Alaska, mosquitoes are a big one of those. And, you know, they have these big hatch outs, and shorebirds have evolved over time to arrive, you know, in synchronicity with these insects in their hatch outs. And so even just the slight shifts in a week of these food events could impact their success. And then here in Oregon, when they're passing by for their time to fuel up, so they're here to eat so that they can then fly 3,000 miles. And so keeping your dog on a leash and not flushing these shorebirds is really important, because they're here to save up energy. And if you are chasing them around, you're causing them to waste that energy that they need to fly to Mexico. And then predation can be a problem, especially when we think of the snowy plover here in Oregon. You know, predators eating nests is something that can impact their success as well. And that's me.
So many, I think they're the mirrors that wash up in the springtime. It's just like
Yeah,
a lot of them.
so those are mostly chicks.
Yeah.
And so that's one of just kind of the unfortunate realities of colonial living. There's a lot of birds, and so a lot of them die. We don't necessarily make it. And our biologist actually told me this idea of that. It's kind of sad, but it does make sense, is that the more dead chicks you see wash up actually means we had a more successful breeding colony. You know, more eggs hatched and those chicks survived. And so it would actually almost be more concerning if you didn't see any washing up, because then that would mean none of the eggs hatched and we didn't even get any chicks. So yeah, it's never fun to see, but it's just kind of unfortunate reality of living so close to a colonial nesting bird colony. Yeah.
So, did I get it right that the pelagic cormorant is actually not pelagic?
Correct.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
With all the changes in bird names that they make, I don't think change.
You're right. Yeah, because it doesn't spend its whole life at sea, and it comes, you know, it'll be on docks, it'll be on the shore in the wintertime, so I don't know, I'll have to look up who picked that name. Betsy?
About a month ago, I saw a huge flocking bird right next to Table Rock
Uh-huh.
on East Street. And none on top of the rock. And then about a week later, they were all gone. And none were on top of the rock. So were they just,
They're just kind of coming back,
Eating each
scoping
other?
things out. Yeah, they're just starting to come back. I don't know exactly why they do that behavior, but yeah,
They went back out.
yeah, they went back out, maybe not as far as they did last time. I would think, it's also still food driven, so if there's not food for them right around
Yeah.
the rock, then they're like, all right, well, let's go back out to sea, maybe we'll come back. So, yeah, I don't know much more than that, but yeah, I've been noticing that too.
So we live near China Creek Beach.
Yep.
And in the summertime, they're protecting the snowy plover.
Mhm.
And I wondered, what happens to them after they breed? Do we see them here?
We
They
do.
look around.
Mhm.
Do they look like the, oh my goodness.
The sandpipers?
The little sandpiper, do they look like that?
They do. I mean, to a birder, they look different.
Okay.
There's distinctions between them. But they do look similar and they are still around. How many did you guys have on the Christmas bird count?
22, but the day before we saw 42.
Or at China Creek, right?
Oh, well, it wasn't China Creek, it was
Okay.
down, at, 2 Mile Creek, it's, further down,
Oh, okay.
New River.
New River, yeah. Okay, yeah. But yeah, so there's 20, 30 plovers around.
Because we recently thought we were seeing them.
You could have,
Yes,
yeah.
we've been
Okay, so-
seeing them this spring,
Okay,
yeah.
and we thought that's them, and then you were showing us the sandpiper, and I thought, well, maybe we saw the sandpiper, but my instinct was that was the snow.
Yeah, the snowy
So
plover,
they just stay here. then.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
not migratory.
not really, because it's kind of temperate, so they kind of stick around. This time of year, a lot of times you might just see them up in the rack line, kind of just standing, sitting in footprints, things like that. But yeah, they're definitely around.
This woman has a bird, a picture,
Oh.
a Bible.
There you go.
And that's it.
Yeah, oh
So
yeah.
we did see
Definitely
the
did.
snowy plover, and they're very fast,
Oh, yes.
and it just, I mean,
Yeah.
almost like a hummingbird, you can't, and
They're
they're just
little
running, oh my goodness. Okay, so because they're very protective here, I mean, we go there very regularly, and every time they still give us the whole spiel, where to walk, we're like, we got it. But they come right out, the minute you pull up, somebody in a camper,
Yes.
they're all the
Yes,
time,
we love them. They're
Yes.
great people.
they're very well protected.
Yes. Yeah, they're a federally listed species, so they're protected under the Endangered Species Act. So that's part of why that's the case, yeah. Mhm.
The burrows you talked about on the Elephant Rock.
Uh-huh.
What is the consistency of the rock? You say they're deep burrows, so is it like, are they burrowing into rock?
No, so a lot of the burrows, like some of the burrows that face rock are like naturally occurring rock crevices. So they might use a naturally occurring rock crevice. Or if there's enough soil and sediment, they will actually dig into the soil, but they can't dig into pure rock, no. So it's either like a natural rock crevice or they're digging into the soil.
Gotcha.
You mentioned earlier that the range of the tufted puffin is diminishing in the south.
Yep.
Yeah, are there some reasons for that?
I think the hypothesis is fish forage and, things like ocean warming and food conditions, but we haven't gotten any tags on tufted puffins yet. So that's what we need to do next, is get tags on puffins and see where they're going out at sea and see where they're foraging and then researching those areas. I think that's the current hypothesis, is that it's related to fish, but we need more research to really be sure. Thank you.
So thinking about the Velcro and the beak.
Yeah.
So how do they release the fish?
I don't know. Open their mouth. Yeah, I don't know more than anyone else does about that. I would assume once they open their mouth, maybe they can, and they do have tongues, so maybe they kind of loosen it out.
Maybe the chicks bite this, and pull it in.
Maybe.
Or the other bird.
So out at Tokyo Point, just using my binoculars,
Uh-huh.
there's been some big geese out there.
Yep.
And so this one person of knowledge told me, oh, no, they're sea geese. Are they sea geese or are they geese? They're a
Oh, that's cool though. No, Canadian, Canada. Yeah,
So it wasn't, they're Canadian geese.
yeah, Canada geese. Yep. Mhm.
That's sort of what I thought.
The first time I moved here though, when I saw the geese out there, I thought it was kind of a funny sight, but yeah, they're just regular Canada geese.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you seeing much evidence of avian flu along the coast?
I think yes, there is some. I'm not, ODF&W actually tends to track that a little bit better than we do. And then migratory birds, there's other divisions within the Fish and Wildlife Service that do that more than I do. So I don't have a great answer. There was, I think, a murre that tested positive last year, and then a lot of waterfowl tend to get it more. But we don't have such giant congregations of them as like some of the more inland sites do. So it hasn't been something that I've been hearing a ton about, but I mean, definitely, yes, it is around.
How about for like songbirds?
I haven't heard about it too much in songbirds right
Seems
now.
like there's less this year.
Yeah, it could be, or it could be the weather, it could be the time of day, yeah, I have a great answer to that.
So, sometimes we find a bird washed up. What we do, we get it back to the river, but,
Wait, a live bird or a dead bird?
no, live,
Oh, okay.
but they're washed up and they can't go anywhere. And is that the mirror or is it the mirror we found? There's a certain bird that can't walk.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
so we basically get it back to the river and let it swim.
Yeah, and
Well-
it might have a disease that it would not survive anyway, you know, a lot of times when they got washed up, it's because they're weak and they have some other conditions.
Well, the storms sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes that's it too. Sometimes that's it too.
Can I,
Yeah, right.
the other bird that if this is happening in the winter time that you may see is a western grebe.
Oh, yeah.
And the western
Yeah,
grebes,
you're kind of-
yeah, and they, you know, their legs are placed back so far that they look like they're in terrible condition. Well, they're really not designed to walk on land.
Right,
And they're designed to be in the water. And so, but they have to rest if they're in the water and the water's been really in these gigantic waves, you know, they get exhausted when they come ashore.
So they're really fine, I guess is what you're saying.
Well, they can be,
Yeah.
they can, some of them will recover,
Mhm.
and others, when you see them later, they're dead.
Yeah.
So that's it, you know, it's a critical time for them.
I'm the manager of the barn next door,
Uh-huh.
and there is a lecture coming up in May, for bird watching, specifically dead birds on the beach.
Oh,
I
coast.
don't have the date right, I think it's the 10th of May. Just call the office, give you better information.
Yeah, we'd love to come to that. Is it Coast doing it, you think?
I haven't
Yeah,
seen.
it's a coast.
It's a Coast thing? Okay, that's cool. Yeah, there's a lot of people who help do that here in London. Yeah.
A little on topic. How do you count 20,000 birds in the marsh?
Well, in the Marsh, we're not so much, but the Seabirds, the refuge, so I was telling you guys earlier, so the Oregon coast is, so who I work for is the Oregon Coast National Wildlife Refuge Complex, which is 6 different national wildlife refuges up and down the whole coast of Oregon. And one of those refuges, like I said, is Oregon Islands National Wildlife Refuge. And so for the last, at least 20 years, every year, we've been flying in a helicopter with the doors off and with cameras. And we fly the whole coast of Oregon and we take photographs of all the tops of the rocks with the birds on them. And, you know, you have to fly high enough that you're not disturbing the birds because you want to count the birds, so you don't want them to fly away, but low enough that you can get pictures. So we take these photographs every year, and then an intern literally counts every single bird. In the subset of pictures, I don't think they do all of them, but, yeah, so we have a really long-term data set. It only gets the surface nesting birds, so, you know, the puffins, which are in burrows, you can't see from a helicopter, but the common murres, they are counted painstakingly by an intern. Yeah.
What is your scope of focus in your role here in Bandon?
Yeah, so I'm the refuge manager for the south coast of that refuge complex. So that covers Bandon Marsh. So we have an office up on North Bank Lane. If anyone hasn't come yet, that's where I'm at. So we oversee Bandon Marsh National Wildlife Refuge, and then Coquille Point, which is that headland there, and then all the offshore rocks. And then we have another coastal headland down in Curry County that's actually closed to the public, but we're doing a coastal prairie plant restoration project there. So that kind of stuff, you know, trails, those 2 staircases at Coquille Point, those are under our management, and so a little bit of everything.
Are there tours of the marsh we can join?
Carol gives some great tours out at Coquille Point this summertime. So, Carol's been partnering with South Slough National Estuarine Reserve, to do bird walks out at Coquille Point. So that's on South Slough's website. There's a lot this summer. You guys scheduled a fair amount. 6. But we don't have anything currently at the Marsh. We usually do try to do at least one with South Slough, but that's not on the calendar yet. But if you come by and I'm around, I'm happy to show you around. Yeah, sure.
There's a trail out there.
Yes.
I see the trail, yeah.
And then you can walk out on the marsh itself.
Well, I was fascinated to see the before and after pictures. I had no
Oh,
idea.
yeah,
that
it was-
they had previously been in agricultural,
Mhm.
and I think it's just stunning.
Yeah.
So, whoever, you said it was a great success story.
Yeah, it was the largest tidal marsh restoration in the state of Oregon at the time.
How
About
many years
400
was that?
acres.
To-
It was from 2009 to 2012-ish. It was major. They put a power line under the marsh. They elevated the road. They put in, yeah, it was a big production. But it was great now.
Is it restored to what had previously been there?
Yeah, almost. So, in 2020, there was some researchers from OSU and other kind of, estuarine science groups that came out, and so the Bandon Marsh unit, so the side in that picture, the one on 101, on the west side of 101, that section of marsh has never been altered for agriculture, and so that was kind of our reference site.
Uh-huh.
And then they restored, the side on the east side in the Leston and used the Bandon Marsh side to compare. And so, yeah, basically, elevation is growing, the salinity, organic soil compound, all that kind of stuff. And then what's interesting about salt marshes is that, they're so driven by that salt water coming in. And so the second you let salt water back into the system, all the pasture grasses that can't tolerate salt water are gonna die, and only the salt tolerant grasses are gonna come back. So the ocean kind of regulates habitats on its own with that salt water. So the Noleston Marsh doesn't have some of the more rare specialized salt marsh plants because it undergoes that disturbance of being turned into agriculture. But yeah, it's mostly all native plants now, and the birds are coming back, and yeah, it's really cool. Yes.
There was, property added on the road between Coquille and Coos Bay over in that part. Like,
Oh, up the river, you mean?
yeah.
Yeah, so that's ODF&W, that's state land, the Coquille Valley Wildlife Management Area.
You thought it was Winter Lake,
Well, yeah, and Winter Lake, that's still private property.
which is
though.
part of that.
Yeah, so that's managed by the state, ODF&W. So it's not part of the refuge, even though it's still, conserved
Do you know what the
wetlands.
status of it is? Have
I
they-
don't know much about it right now.
Thank you.
Anything else? Well, thank you guys for coming and celebrating.
A couple of things. I mean, what an amazing resource we have here.
Yes.
Yeah, Alex, you did a great job. Yeah, nice to have that extra. So we have a couple of, new, additional presentations coming up in March, on March 15th. Pinnipeds. Susan Reimer will be talking about that. So if you don't know about pinnipeds, you need to come in.
Is
I
it
don't know a lot about
kind
them.
of bird?
Yeah.
What's a pinniped?
Sea lion.
Sea lions, seals.
California sea lion, harbor seal.
Yeah.
And elephant seals.
And elephant seals. Yeah, and the whale watch, the last week, actually March 22nd through the 30th, we'll be out at Face Rock Overlook, and we'll have our binoculars there, and we're hoping we'll be able to see them this time as they come from Baja back up north. We were here in December, and we were there for 5 days, and it was cold and windy, and we didn't see a darn one. But hopefully, the weather's gonna be better, so we'll be closer to the shore because they're bringing their babies back home on it. So March 22nd through the 30th, we'll be there at, yeah. And if you were really excited, they're probably leaving to go to that mimosa party.